And that's when I realized that I, in fact, was not eating a durian in the dark, but a sponge soaked in gasoline. And that noise was, in fact, a dog. Hello there. You caught me in the middle of a story. Totally not that I pressed record and made something up. Much like I've shown by failure, hooking an audience is hard. Getting them to listen or read or watch, especially in a world full of stuff to listen to, read, and watch, and ever shrinking attention spans. So, how do you claw your way into your audience's psyche? How do you force your story to stick in their brain? And how do you keep them interested? All in this episode of Why Are You Talking About This? Nerd. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of WAYTAT Nerd. I'm your host, William, and I will be your guide through the many ways to hook and engage an audience. Advice I should probably be following, but won't because I'm very bad at change. But before we get into it, I want to thank you so much for listening. It means the world to me. Even if the show was recommended by a 10 out of 10 on Twitter, whose stipulation to bang them is to answer a quiz on this show correctly. Weirdly specific, I know, but I have a feeling that someone might be paying for that. Okay, as far as updates go, I firstly gotta, of course, give some shout-outs. So go watch When Kashka on Twitch, because this is the closest I can get to supporting them right now, because I'm busy as fuck. And I really want to watch my friends stream, but I have work, and this, and trying to be an adult, which sucks. Also, if you're in the market for some jewelry or some cute stickers, check out Mystic Luna. They are a, basically brand new shop. And they have some really cool stuff. They're also online on Etsy. So go check both those out, and also don't be a dick, because I will find you. As far as my own show goes, we don't really have any updates. Besides, I am sorry for being a bit late. I don't really have an excuse for you. I mean, I'm moving. Well, I recently moved, but that's what you want from me. This is a hobby. Okay? If you want me to do this full time, pay me for it. On to the show. Okay, so today we're going to be talking audience investment and hooking your audience. Not that kind of hooking. And if you're here because you don't even know what the fuck an audience is, like Americans don't know what the fuck a kilometer is, then you're in luck. But if you're here just because you like me, then you're also in luck. I love to hear myself talk. Okay, so let's talk about what an audience even is for that first group of people. An audience is a group who've listened to An audience is a group of people who've gathered to listen to, witness, or read a public media. In ancient days, it was a public performance or event, but now it can be anything from AO3 fanfics about Sonic and feet, to posting your tits on Twitter, to your terrible podcast. And the word comes from the Latin word for to hear, audentia. But this doesn't tell you basically anything about them or how to win them over. because they're not going to be impressed by that Latin fact. Trust me, I've tried. So let's talk about ways to break them down, beginning with some categorical umbrellas. And these 5 categories are the kind of audience you will generally run across. So first are experts. They're audience members with a lot of knowledge on the subject in question, from doctors and academics to someone that reads way too much AO3 or watches too many foot jobs on Pornhub. All these people would be experts to understand that your disgusting fanfic doesn't make biological, literary, sexual, or moral sense. If you're writing with experts in mind, you might lose the parts of your audience that aren't experts if you go too hard in the topic and start using industry lingo or expert language, but might lose your expert audience if you don't do it correctly, which we kind of talked about on Technobabble. But experts are invested if the topic is handled well or the aspects of their particular field is. Like, for example, if you're writing a combat piece and have very good descriptions and understanding of real combat techniques and moves, then the sword nerds, weapon historians, and martial artists will be more into it. But go too far or fuck it up, you might stand to lose everyone. Second are lay people. These are the general public or newbies into your particular subject matter. They don't know a whole lot about the subject or genre, and they know essentially just the basics. So, for your nasty little fanfic, they're intrigued, but they don't know what all these sex acts named after states are, or what they have to do with anything regarding feet. A good way to grab onto this audience is to anticipate their questions and answer them in the story. Think about the questions you had as a beginner into your subject, or what people would ask about your world or story, and try to answer questions around those. However, at the same time, while they're easy to invest, they're just as easy to lose. Because lay people want something that appeals to what they think about the genre and listen very closely to their whims. Meaning that you can't really deviate from your core genre too hard, or go into deep lore. Like if you're writing a fantasy story, yes, aliens have been a part of fantasy writing since the genres existed. Most people don't think about aliens in fantasy. Meaning if you show them a bunch of elves and knights fighting a squad of alien super soldiers, you're gonna risk losing the layman. Third are authorities. Authorities represent people that hold power and influence over you or make choices for you or about you. And this can be anything from bosses to publishers to platforms to patrons. Basically, when you write for this audience, you have to prove that you know what you're talking about and give them a reason to keep you around, and that you, at the very least, respect their time. Which can be difficult and sucks, but is very important to write with them in mind. See, I'm lucky to not be so out of control just naturally that podcast platforms drop me. But if that's a risk for you, then fair warning, you might want to dial it back. Now, the quickest way to lose this audience, and probably your platform, is to demonstrate you have no idea what the fuck you're talking about and that you hate them. Which, if you're doing both of those things at the same time, is probably intentional, you know what you're doing. A fourth are technicians. This is the part of your audience that wants clear and elaborate details and to be presented clear guidelines. They're the people analyzing every aspect of your story, wanting more and more detail, and trying to find the secret hidden rules of your world for their YouTube video essays. If you write with this audience in mind, remember that your writing is under intense scrutiny. Every word is being analyzed and questioned. This doesn't mean that it's time to sit down and start pissing, shitting, crying, and coming. It just means going through making sure you mean what you say and that there's enough detail for them. Technicians just want something to chew on while they consume their media, so make sure there's clear and precise detail and consistency between details for them to really get moist over. Which, I mean, trust me, a lot of the technicians I've seen do get horny over very good details. And finally, are there hybrids? I lied to you about being 6, there's 5. But hybrids come up from the sewers, clog all your drains, suck on your hair, and tell your cats all the secrets of the universe they don't know about and give them PTSD. Not kidding. These are people that are a combination of groups. Like an expert manager knows a lot about the subject and also has power over you. Meaning that you'd have to prove you know what you're talking about and be able to back it up. Which is fucking terrifying, as it should be. But, okay, calm down. They're real, however they can't hurt you, because you're not writing for them right now. Unless you are. In that case, you're kind of fucked, bud. But audiences can be broken down into another couple profile groupings. So first would be age. When you address different age groups, you need to change your word choices, subject matter, and sentence structures. Age also changes how appropriate certain story beats are for your audience and how receptive they'll be to it. And you need to ensure that that age group is both mature enough and are able to understand your message, and that message would even appeal to them in the first place. For example, if you're talking about some of the deep queer, like polysexual, trans NB lesbians, and fairs, like it's just entirely normal and a common thing that everyone should know about, you'll get good traction with the deep queers or the people that'll just nod along, or people that understand but aren't at that level yet. But when talking to young children or boomers, you need to alter your focus. Young kids will just go, I don't get it. Because most things around, not even queer relationships, just relationships in general, young kids aren't really going to understand. They might pretend that they do, and they understand more than you'd think, but young kids are not really getting a lot of it. And that's mostly because they don't have that experience yet, and they also don't have really the capability of understanding it yet. But if you focus on the angles of love and identity, kids generally get that part. For the boomers, you'll need to simplify the categories. Sure, a boomer doesn't know what a trans NB lesbian is, but saying a lesbian is understandable. And also, if you don't want to attract a boomer or a young age group, you don't have to. Or, really any age group. The second is location. The regionality of your audience will affect your audience as... The regionality of your audience will affect how you write to them as well. Because different regions have different dialects, beliefs, surroundings, and priorities compared to others. Meaning you need to change your style to appeal to those areas. So yes, your writing can help bridge the gap between your originality and another one, and bring your audience in and welcome them. However, you do need to bridge the gap, which means meeting them halfway. For example, if you want to write to Southerners, you can add some y'alls, a strong and sassy grandma, cholesterol, kudzu, a few bless your hearts, and a vague but overwhelming hatred of authority and the law, and boom, there you go. You got the Southerners by the heartstrings. Same with the Pacific Northwest folk. Give us some rain, weeb, a few alt cuties, a flannel lesbian, and talk dirty to us about how your coffee and beer tastes, and we're hooked. Third is the culture. Every audience has their own cultural perspective that affects their writing practices and view of the world. If you write for that culture, you need to make sure that you're considerate and respectful to their cultural heritage and traditions. And this will also help you to make your message come through more clearly to your audience, because by including cultural specifics, you use the same shorthands that they do, which endears you to them. Like writing for a Japanese audience, use washpans instead of anvils for something heavy falling onto someone, or when writing something based in Ireland, make sure that if you have traditional Irish poetry, which I gotta say I'm not gonna try to read the name of because I'm bad at pronouncing things. That's actually a quatrain with rhymes and alliteration, and it's probably a little bit dirty. The last three are really closely tied together, and these are experience, expectation, and perspective. Your audience's life history and experiences will massively affect how they hear your message. Like someone who's been the victim of racially motivated crime won't be very perceptive to your all orcs are evil, let's kill them all thing, when you've shown very, very clearly that they're a culture of people. Same with their expectations. If you figure out why your audience is listening to you in the first place, then you can address their needs and wants from the story. Mind, that doesn't necessarily mean write slop. It means if you advertise a sword and sorcery adventure with big titties and bigger battles, you can't actually provide them with the story of a very creative nun with too much free time. And finally, figure out where your audience is coming from, even if you disagree or find their point of view repugnant. This will help you to alter your delivery to appeal to their biases, ideas, and beliefs so you can get under their skin and deliver your message. Like again with the deep queer story. If you're trying to teach that the queers aren't there to hurt you, you might have to get under the skin of someone who thinks that by baiting them with their own beliefs before you prove it wrong. Now, all of that sounds like you should be altering your writing for every random dick and gen that comes along. But that isn't true. Because every story has two audiences inside of them. One of them is hungry, one of them is horny. The intended audience and then the unintended audience. Your choice on which is which. Your intended audience are the people you're trying to bring in or attract or bring in with your writing. While your unintended audience are the people you're not trying to talk to. In general, it's a good idea to make your unintended audience as small as possible, but that doesn't mean you should totally change the identity of your writing to appeal to everyone. Write the story as intended, but keep in mind that your audience will be... But keep in mind who your audience will be and who you want them to be, and write for their investment. Okay, let's talk about why it matters. So, why should you try to invest in an audience? Well, besides looking at you with a mix of shock and disgust to asking such a question, there's really two ways to answer. So, firstly, audience investment matters because the audience are the people you're selling stuff to. Whether it's because you work for a publisher or because you're trying to not do a regular job anymore, share the show by the way, you're trying to sell your audience on something. Maybe for some audience members it's you, for others it's your work, and for others it's the sponsorship deal that you could represent to them. You need to invest your audience for anything to actually come of your work. Because an invested audience will buy the next installment, will believe in you, will vouch for you, and share your work with others. You know how hyperfixated nerds get. Really, ultimately, the survival of your art or income hinges on your audience being into what you're writing and believing your bullshit. Secondly, your audience is part of the writing process. Even if it's just for yourself, think about who you're really writing for. Because you can be your own audience. And who you're writing for can and should change your approach to what you're writing. Your voice, your tone, your sentence structure, the details you include, and how delicately you handle certain topics, and how gentle you are to your audience all changes. For example, you could be writing in a grimdark setting. But if your story is to drag normal people in, it's going to be more on the side of high fantasy, because there's going to be very little guts and gore and hopelessness. But if you're aiming directly at a grimdark audience, you're going to pump it up a bit and really show off the grimness. Both of which are important and need to be considered to make interesting writing meant to appeal to an audience. Because if they don't feel targeted, they won't have interest. Speaking of which... Alright, before we get into the explanation of audience investment and how to get it, we should first learn how to analyze your audience. So the first step in audience analysis is to define the goal of what you're making, which is also the first step of audience investment. Are you trying to communicate something? Are you making a piece of literature or pulp fiction? Are you writing a scientific journal? If you said the first or last one, what the fuck are you doing here? But anyways, after that, find out the demographics and group your audience is a part of. And from that, you can figure out their interests and motivations. Basically, by narrowing down what group they identify with and some demographic information, you can find out their interests, and from there you can figure out where to hit it and why they're tuning in. For example, if you're trying to get men in their mid-40s who play Warhammer 40k and don't have a bunch of waifu figurines to play your game, put the faction of burly men in power armor or dudes from the 40s in front of them. And if they do have waifu figurines, armpits. Once you have that, then analyze your audience's behavior. In order to appeal to them better and engage them during their own time, you need to understand their behavior patterns. When do they have free time? What are they doing in that time? Why would they engage with your shit during that time? After that, think about their cultural background. What kind of culture can you appeal to with your stuff? Going with the same guy from earlier, you can appeal to them by making your stuff feel like how Warhammer was, quote unquote, back in the good old days, whatever that means for them. And it doesn't even really have to resemble it as long as it strikes that same nerve. Then figure out the things that they want and appeal to those. Like again, if that dude is tired of how much Warhammer shifted to focus on the competitive aspects, and definitely not about how his hobby has gone woke, then you can really get him by the sack by advertising that your game's balance and rules are better and competitive isn't a focus. Once you've rolled out the first generation of ads and appealing, watch closely what happens and take notes. And from those notes, change up and tailor your message and language to something they like more, use audience feedback to your campaigns, and develop a detailed profile of your audience based on the engagement and feedback, and then do it all over again with this new information. But with that, let's discuss how to grab your audience and establish it for the long term. Now, the first one we're going to focus on is using the good old classic Ethos Pathos logo system. If you went to public school in the US, you've probably at the very least heard of this one. Well, this classic approach uses one of three to convince your audience of something. In most cases, it's a form of argumentation, but here we're using it to convince them to consume our stuff instead of a competitor's. Ethos is the ethical appeal. With this one, you're banking on your audience finding you credible and reliable, and being of good moral character and upstanding, meaning that your audience trusts you. A lot of content creators end up being built on this once they're established for a long period of time, like Markiplier. And like Markiplier, if they're tuning in after you've established an ethos, they're there largely because it's you doing something and not the thing that you're doing specifically. I mean, think about the time the Markiplier came back from a long break to do the Pokemon Smasher Pass, and that created a trend. That has nothing to do with gaming. That has nothing to do with him. He just showed back up and did that. And if this sounds good to you, you establish this by demonstrating your expertise and accomplishments, agreeing with the morality and ethics of your audience, using the correct terminology and syntax, and sounding unbiased and appropriate. Pathos is the emotional appeal. Here you're banking on your audience liking you, meaning they feel sympathy towards you and understand your perspective on an emotional level and think you're pretty cool. This is usually how a lot of content creators start, and oftentimes maintain their audience, or how companies will try to appeal to you. By making you feel good, they can get an audience. And hey, usually for smaller organizations and companies, this is usually pretty genuine. Like me, for example. This is genuinely me and not a character. I'm just playing up some parts of my personality to appeal to you more over a podcast for comedic effect. But you develop this by using meaningful and emotional language, using examples and stories that will make people feel something, and implying meaning behind your words. And finally, logos is an appeal to logic. Here you don't necessarily care about being moral or emotional. Your focus is on using logic and reason to convince people of your rightness. This is usually used in science and academia, but you can use it in fantasy writing, especially with your technicians and experts. Logos in fiction is also usually making your audience feel like your world makes some kind of logical sense and that things happen for a reason. If this appeals to you, you can increase your logos by citing facts, statistics, using literal comparisons, and citing authorities. But if that doesn't work in your fiction, you can reference facts and logical arguments, create your own, and use advanced language. However, this isn't the only way. In fact, for fiction writing, it's best to take from many different places. Luckily for you, a lot of other people have already done that for you/us, that's specifically for storytelling. First, hook your audience early. In visual media, you have about 15 seconds to hook your audience. And in writing, you have about the first 10 pages. Audiences need to be compelled to start engaging with your story. And you have 4 hook categories as your options. Those are humor, heart, hope, and help. Humor is making your audience laugh and want to keep reading because it's funny, which is a large part of what I'm trying to do. Heart is captivating people's emotions, which I'm not really trying to do, but it would be nice. Hope offers something inspiring to move them onwards. That's definitely nerd. And help is something that'll assist the listener or reader in some way, or feels like it will, and that's normal WAYTAT. You can also use intrigue and mystery to lure people in by leaving unanswered questions you spend the rest of the story communicating. Which is the second point, actually. Leave parts of your story untold. Like I just said, questions and mystery lure people in and keep them going. Make sure some parts of your story that are crucial remains mysterious and untold. People will want those to be answered. Of course, you will eventually have to answer those questions, but you can really string people along if you know what you're doing. Third, build some suspense. Whether that's through the use of serialization, whether that's through the use of serializing your story, intercutting cliffhangers with other plot lines, and dangling some piece of information being close at hand to keep and build suspense. Now, mind, you don't have to keep raising the stakes. Just make sure that at least someone in your cast is likable, or something in your story is cool or interesting, and that your audience stands to learn more about them, or that thing is under threat to keep them interested. Fourth, engage with their imagination. The more descriptive the language, the better, and try to be as sensory as possible. This will draw your audience in more and help them to more clearly imagine the story and what exactly is going on. And this doesn't just go for technicians. Having sensory information makes it a lot easier to just kind of fall into the story more than you normally would. Fifth, let it be shared. Basically, look at GW and do the opposite. Let people make fan art, fanfics, and share their experiences about your story. Obviously, don't be a pushover with your copyright, protect your art monarchs, but you need a bigger audience by letting them advertise for you instead of trying to force ads. And a lot of the things that drive people towards a story or game is hearing about it from someone else that loves it and them being curious. So like if you have a war game and someone shares an animation of it to their YouTube, maybe don't strike it down and try to sue them. It'll look a lot better on you if you go, wow, well done my guy, thanks for the art. Because then people will think you're cool, and also that artist might use your stuff again, which is more free advertising. And finally, use emotion to enthrall your audience. Emotional ties to the story creates a personal connection and draws the audience in without nearly as much effort on your part. It also makes it more memorable and impactful. So the best way to do that is use descriptive language, have relatable characters that reflect real struggles, experiences, and emotions, weave in personal anecdotes from your characters into the story, try to breed a sense of empathy for your characters by sharing their thoughts and feelings, and making them appeal to a particular audience that you're going for. But, yeah, with that, we're done with the advice. So, let's get out of here. Man, I really gotta do some more like culture war topics and some crazy controversies instead of these writing advice ones. Y'all are missing some really spicy opinions and like some stuff that'll make you question yourself. Anyways, if you have opinions, advice on how to make the show better, how to engage your audience, why I totally didn't dress down your entire personality, and really anything else you want to tell me, make sure to email me at waytatpods@gmail.com. That is WAYTATPODS@gmail.com. Remember to check out my other podcast, WAYTAT, where I do basically the same thing, but with stuff that's normally on time. And also remember to follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at WAYTAT_pods for more episode announcements and occasional shit posts. Have a good night. Have a good night. Don't murder. Have fun. And remember, you're the audience too. Woo yourself. This has been Why Are You Talking About This Nerd? I've been your host, William. Good night.